Zuri's journey, the price of innocence, lost. In the heart of the bustling African town of Ilela, life moved to a rhythm of both hope and hardship. Situated between vast plains and stretching hills, Ilela was a town full of life, yet burdened by the weight of unfulfilled dreams. The markets were always alive with colour, with the exchange of goods, the clatter of voices and the warmth of the sun shining down on the clay-roofed houses that lined its streets. But for 14-year-old Zuri, Ilela was a place where dreams felt out of reach, a place where society's expectations weighed heavily on young shoulders. Zuri lived with her mother, Amina, who had always been the pillar of their family. Amina had raised Zuri on her own after the sudden death of Zuri's father, Ezekiel, when Zuri was barely an infant. With no family to rely on, Amina worked tirelessly in the market, selling fruits and vegetables to provide for Zuri and her younger brother, Timi. Despite the challenges, Amina was determined to give Zuri a better life. Her dream was to see her daughter educated, to have Zuri rise above the poverty that had defined their family for generations. Amina believed education was the way out of a cycle of hardship, and she often told Zuri, "With your mind, you can change the world, my daughter." Zuri, bright-eyed and full of ambition, believed her mother's words with all her heart. She excelled in school, loved reading books about science, and spent hours dreaming of a future where she could become a doctor. She saw education as her escape, her way out of the confines of Ilela and the struggles that her family faced. She didn't want to be another woman tied down to tradition, bound by the expectations of the town. But the weight of those expectations began to weigh on her as well. The town was small, and the customs were rigid. Girls were expected to marry young, have children, and carry on the legacy of their mothers. To Zuri, these traditions felt like chains that threatened to pull her back into a future she didn't want. But she fought against those chains, clinging to her dreams. Then came Amari, the charismatic stranger, Amari's return. Amari was a 19-year-old young man who had recently returned to Ilela after spending several years in the city. He had grown up in the town but left for a better life in the city. When he came back, he returned as someone entirely different, someone older, more experienced, and far more worldly than the boy Zuri remembered. Amari had a reputation in the town. He was charming, confident, and seemed to carry an air of mystery about him. His smile was magnetic, and he had a way of making anyone feel as though they were the most important person in the world. He was the kind of man who could make people believe in their own worth with just a few words. Zuri noticed him from the very first time he visited her mother's market stall. At first, he was just a face in the crowd, someone who greeted her mother politely and asked for the usual fruits. But soon Amari began seeking Zuri out. He would walk her home from school, his presence a comforting distraction from the mundane life she was beginning to feel trapped in. They would talk about everything and nothing, about the city, about her dreams, about the future. To Zuri, his attention felt like a sign that maybe there was something more to life than what she saw in Ilela. Amari began to tell Zuri about his experiences in the city, about the freedom, the excitement, and the possibilities that awaited people who were brave enough to leave Ilela behind. He spoke of a life full of opportunity, where the limits of small-town thinking didn't apply. He promised her that she could have that life too, if she followed him. For the first time, Zuri felt truly seen. Amari's words made her believe that there was more waiting for her outside the suffocating expectations of Ilela. The more they talked, the more Zuri became captivated by him. His gaze, his smooth words, the way he seemed to understand her better than anyone else. It was all too much for her young heart to resist. His promises of a bright future filled her with hope. He made her feel like she could do anything, be anyone. It was an intoxicating feeling, one that Zuri desperately wanted to hold on to. The fall. The betrayal won. Fateful afternoon as they sat together under the shade of a mango tree just outside the town, Amari made his move. He kissed her. Zuri froze, unsure of what to do, but her body responded in a way she couldn't understand. In that moment, she felt both alive and terrified. It wasn't love, at least not the kind she had imagined. It was something darker, more dangerous. But Zuri was young and her emotions were still developing. She was caught in the thrill of the moment, swept up by the idea of Amari's promises and the belief that he cared for her. But what followed was a whirlwind of emotions that Zuri was unprepared for. Amari's attentions grew more intense, and their meetings became more secretive. At first, it felt like a beautiful romance, a forbidden love affair. But soon, Zuri began to realize that Amari wasn't truly interested in her. He was interested in controlling her, in manipulating her. He was playing a game, and Zuri was just another pawn. Months passed, and Zuri felt the weight of her actions as her body began to change. Her breasts became tender, and she felt nauseous every morning. Her periods were late. It was a silent panic that gripped her every time she saw Amari, who began to pull away emotionally as soon as he had what he wanted. He no longer whispered sweet promises. Instead, he acted as though their interactions meant nothing, and he kept his distance. Zuri's fears turned into reality when she could no longer deny the signs. She was pregnant. The realization hit her like a thunderstorm. She was carrying a child, and the father was nowhere to be found. Amari had disappeared, his promises empty and forgotten. She was alone. The heartbreaking confession. Desperate and broken, Zuri turned to the one person she knew would not judge her. Her mother, Amina. With tears streaming down her face, Zuri whispered the words that would change everything. "Mama, I'm pregnant." Amina's face went pale. She froze as though the words couldn't possibly be true. She had raised her daughter to believe in something greater, something beyond the limitations of Ilela. She had worked so hard to give Zuri a future full of promise, but now that future seemed to be slipping away. Amina didn't shout or scold her daughter. Instead, she embraced Zuri tightly, holding her as the weight of the revelation settled in both their hearts. "My child," Amina whispered through her own tears. "How did this happen? You are still so young. I thought we had more time." The pain of seeing her daughter in such a state of fear and shame was unbearable for Amina. Yet, as a mother, she knew she had to stay strong for Zuri. She couldn't let her fall apart. But the rest of the world was less kind. News of Zuri's pregnancy spread quickly through Ilela, and the reactions were swift and brutal. Whispers followed her everywhere, at the market, on the streets, even at school. The town that once saw Zuri as a bright young girl with endless potential now saw her as a fallen woman, someone who had betrayed the very ideals they held sacred. People turned away from her. Her friends avoided her, and the whispers grew louder with each passing day. Even her teachers at school began to distance themselves, treating her as though she had no place in their classroom. Zuri was ostracized, her dreams shattered by the judgment of a community that didn't understand her pain. Amina's unwavering support. But Amina, despite the shame the town had cast upon them, refused to abandon Zuri. "We will rise above this," she said, her voice filled with determination. "You are not defined by this mistake. You are my daughter, and I will not let the world break you." Amina's words became Zuri's lifeline. They faced the trials of pregnancy together, with Amina teaching Zuri how to care for her body, how to handle the changes that came with motherhood. But even as Amina guided her daughter, the weight of the situation became unbearable. Zuri was still just a child, and motherhood was not something she was prepared for. When Zuri gave birth to her son, whom she named Kwame, the pain and confusion of the past months melted into something more profound. Holding her son in her arms, Zuri felt an overwhelming love, an instinctual, deep-rooted love that connected her to him in a way she had never expected. Kwame was innocent, pure, and full of potential. He had no blame for the mistakes of his mother, but the challenges were far from over. Zuri now had to navigate the complexities of being both a young girl and a mother. She had to find the journey of resilience, the road ahead. Zuri's life after Kwame's birth was nothing short of a whirlwind. At just 15 years old, she had to shoulder the responsibilities of a mother while still being a child herself. There was no manual for this. Zuri had to learn quickly, and each day felt like a battle. Her body was still growing, but now it had to nourish a life of its own. Her heart ached with the pressure of her situation, but the love she had for her son kept her going. Amina, ever the strong woman, took on the role of both mother and grandmother, helping to care for Kwame while also teaching Zuri how to balance motherhood and her dreams. "You will go back to school, my daughter," Amina would tell her every time she saw the exhaustion in Zuri's eyes. "Your dreams are not over. We will fight for them together." The weight of judgment from the town, however, was still unbearable. Despite Amina's unwavering support, Zuri couldn't escape the stares, the wispy. The turning point: seeking education amidst adversity. At the age of 16, Zuri made the difficult decision to go back to school. She was terrified. How would the teachers and students treat her now that she was a young mother? Would they ridicule her? But Amina stood by her side, offering strength and encouragement. "We will face this no matter what," Amina told her. Zuri started going back to school part-time, taking her lessons while juggling the needs of Kwame. Her mornings were spent with her son, her afternoons at school, and her evenings studying long into the night. It wasn't easy. The other students were cruel at first, making rude comments and giving her pitying looks. But Zuri pushed through. She couldn't afford to be distracted by their ignorance. She had a son to provide for, a future to build, and dreams to chase. One of the teachers, Mrs. Kamara, noticed Zuri's dedication despite the hardships. Mrs. Kamara had grown up in Ilela, and she had faced many of the same challenges. She had witnessed the struggles of young girls who had been forced to leave school because of pregnancy or societal pressure. But Zuri was different. She was resilient. She was driven. She was fighting for her son, for herself, and for a better future. Mrs. Kamara took Zuri under her wing, offering extra help with her studies and encouraging her to keep pushing forward. "You are capable of more than you know, Zuri," she would tell her. Slowly, things started to change for Zuri. As she excelled in her studies, some of the town's perception of her began to shift. She was no longer seen solely as the girl who had made a mistake. She was becoming the girl who was rewriting her story, the girl who refused to be defined by her past. The community's awakening, changing perceptions. One day, as Zuri walked through the market with Kwame in her arms, she saw a group of young girls from the village gathered around a storyteller, listening intently. The storyteller, an elderly woman named Mama Nia, was known for her wisdom and her tales of courage, resilience, and strength. Zuri stopped to listen. "Once there was a young girl," Mama Nia began, "who was told she was too small, too weak, and too insignificant to change the world. But this girl, though others doubted her, believed in herself. She fought through every storm, every challenge, and every disappointment. She didn't let the world's words drown out her own. And because of her, the world was never the same again." Zuri stood there, transfixed. She realized that Mama Nia's story wasn't just a tale, it was her story. She had been that young girl, told she would never make something of herself. She had been broken by the judgment of the town, but she had fought back. She was no longer the same girl who had made a mistake. She was stronger now, more determined. She could still change the world. Inspired, Zuri stepped forward, cradling Kwame in her arms. She had spent so many years hiding from the world, ashamed of what had happened, but now she was ready to speak her truth. "Mama Nia," she said, her voice trembling but strong, "I want to share my story. I want the young girls in this town to know that they are not defined by their mistakes. The elderly woman smiled warmly and gestured for Zuri to come forward. You have the strength to change minds, Zuri, Mama Nia said. Your story can inspire others. From that day on, Zuri became an advocate for young girls in Ilela. She worked alongside Mama Nia to mentor and support the girls who found themselves in similar situations. She shared her story openly, encouraging them to stay in school, to chase their dreams, and to never let their past dictate their future. She organized support groups for young mothers and worked with local organizations to provide education and resources for them. A future reborn, a mother's triumph. As the years passed, Zuri's life took shape in ways she had never imagined. She became an advocate for girls' education, speaking to local communities about the importance of not giving up on one's dreams, no matter the obstacles. Her advocacy for young mothers gained attention, and she helped establish scholarships and mentorship programs for girls who had been through what she had. Zuri's story was a symbol of hope, a reminder that no matter how much life may knock you down, you can always rise again. She didn't let her circumstances define her. Instead, she built a future for herself and for her son. Kwame grew up surrounded by love and strength. Zuri made sure that he knew the power of resilience, that he understood how his mother fought not just for him, but for herself. As he grew older, he too became proud of his mother's journey, and he promised to always respect and honor her sacrifices. Zuri eventually returned to school, earning a degree in education, and went on to become a teacher. She made sure that every child she taught knew the value of perseverance, the importance of self-belief, and the strength that can come from overcoming adversity. Her story, once full of shame and fear, became one of triumph, a living testament to the power of hope, family, and the ability to create a new future. The moral of Zuri's journey to parents. The most important thing you can do for your child is to show them unconditional love, support, and belief in their ability to overcome obstacles. No matter the circumstances, your love is the foundation that will help them rise above. To children and young adults. Your past doesn't define you. No mistake is beyond redemption. You have the power to rewrite your story, to rise above your circumstances, and to build a future filled with hope and possibility. Do not let shame or fear dictate who you become.